I'm on a business trip overseas. The house my husband walked into so casually was my best friend's house, but my friend was supposedly on her own business trip abroad. With trembling hands, I punched in the security code she had given me and stepped inside. There I found my husband entangled with another woman. I didn't pull her hair. That would have been too childish. Instead, I began to design their hell. How would their perfect lives come crashing down? I was 3 car lengths behind my husband's sedan. That morning, my husband, Evan, had given me a light peck on the cheek and said, "Honey, I have to work late again tonight. Make sure Maya gets dinner and don't wait up." For the past few weeks, it had been the same routine. But that day, I couldn't bring myself to believe him. I kept smelling an unfamiliar perfume on his shirts, a scent I never wore. After 8 years of marriage, of sharing a life and a home, you just know. So that night, I dropped our daughter, Maya, off at my parents' house, and like a woman possessed, I hailed a cab and told the driver to follow my husband's car, my heart pounding in my chest. Please, let this be my imagination. Please, let him really be working late. But the moment I saw where his car stopped, the air was knocked from my lungs. It wasn't some strange woman's house or a cheap motel. It was the apartment building where my best friend of 30 years, Cora, lived. Watching him walk into the building with such familiarity, I couldn't make sense of it. Why was Evan going to Cora's apartment? With a shaking hand, I called her. "Hey, Alara, I'm in Europe for a conference. What's up? Is everything okay?" "Oh, nothing, Cora. Just wanted to hear your voice. Have a good trip." I forced a casual tone and hung up, but my hands wouldn't stop trembling. Cora, the owner of the apartment, wasn't even in the country. Yet my husband had just walked into her empty home. Who could he possibly be meeting in there? My mind went blank with an icy dread. Then, I remembered something. Cora and I had been friends for so long that she'd given me her security code ages ago, just in case of an emergency. A blessing, or perhaps a curse. I took the elevator up. My hand shook as I entered the code, and the familiar chime of the electronic lock sounded. But even in that brief moment as the door unlocked, there was no sound from inside. No, to be precise, the 2 people inside were too preoccupied to notice. I gently pushed the door open and peered into the living room. In that instant, my world silently crumbled. On the living room sofa, my husband was tangled up with a woman. But when I saw her profile, my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't a stranger. It was a face. I knew all too well. It can't be. What is she doing here? With my husband? I rubbed my eyes, denying it over and over in my head. No, I'm seeing things. It can't be her. But no matter how many times I looked, it was undeniably her. Oblivious to my presence, they whispered to each other. "Just a little longer. Once I'm done with her, we can live however we want." The woman's cold voice stabbed me in the heart. Her was me. And the fact that the person saying it was her, I couldn't believe it. I didn't scream. I wanted to storm in, to grab both of them by the hair, but I didn't. Instead, I very slowly, very quietly, closed the door. Wiping my fingerprints from the keypad, I walked silently down the stairs. In that moment, something inside me changed. Standing on the landing, I whispered to myself in a voice that was shaky but cold. "Don't cry, Alara. This is just the beginning." I knew that if I caused a scene then and there, they would be momentarily flustered, but they would eventually find a way out. I didn't know it at the time, but the scene I witnessed that day would become my secret weapon, the very thing that would ultimately bring them to their knees. My name is Alara, and I'm 37 years old. I met Cora when we were 7, and for nearly 30 years, we were like sisters. We grew up in the same neighborhood, went to the same schools, and knew everything about each other's families. I considered her family my own, often spending holidays and sharing meals at their house. My husband of 8 years, Evan, was a kind and gentle man. I believed my life was perfect, with a loving husband, a middle school daughter who was the apple of my eye, and a friend who was like family. But a few months ago, cracks began to appear in that perfect facade. Evan started coming home late. He always placed his phone face down. His spending habits changed. Each time, I tried to brush it off, thinking, he's a good father. He wouldn't do that. But the scene on Cora's sofa that night threw open the door to all the truths I had been desperately avoiding. And the woman on that sofa with my husband was none other than my 30-year best friend's older sister, Serafina. Sarah, who was 6 years older than me and had treated me like her own little sister since we were kids. The moment I confirmed it with my own eyes, my legs almost gave out. Why, Sarah? How could someone who had cared for me so much do this? That night, I lay awake, replaying that question over and over. I couldn't have imagined that the answer would lead me down a path to a forgotten secret from 30 years ago. I returned home that night as if nothing had happened. Sitting alone in the dark living room, the image of them on the sofa and Sarah's chilling words replayed in my mind. My hands trembled, but I didn't cry. Instead, I thought. I planned. How could I utterly destroy them? So completely that they could never get back up. Just after midnight, Evan came home humming a tune. He looked so carefree. You'd never believe he had just been with my best friend's sister. Honey, you're still up? Work was brutal tonight. He feigned exhaustion. Did you drop Maya off at her grandparents'? The blatant lie made my stomach churn, but I forced a smile, playing the part of the dutiful wife. You must be exhausted. Mom and Dad have her. Go wash up and get some rest. I'll heat up some soup for you. My calm demeanor seemed to put him at ease. He didn't suspect a thing. He even kissed my cheek, playing the role of the world's most loving husband. As I accepted his kiss, I made a vow to myself. Go ahead, smile all you want. Your happy days are numbered. From that day on, I lived a double life. In front of my husband, I was the naive, unsuspecting wife. When I was alone, I was a woman coldly sharpening her knives. In the mornings, I'd iron his shirts and pack Maya's lunch, sending them off with a loving wave. But the moment they were gone, I would collapse, shaking with rage. I never knew pretending to be in love could be so draining, but I clenched my teeth and continued the charade. If I broke down now, I would lose everything to them, and my daughter would be the one to suffer. The urge to snatch his phone and confront him was immense, but I suppressed it. A rash move would only tip them off, and they would erase all the evidence. I decided to take my time, to gather everything calmly, piece by piece. As I calmed down and replayed the events, I realized how many things didn't add up. The first question was how the two of them could meet so brazenly in Cora's empty apartment. But thinking about it, it wasn't strange at all for Sarah to be there. Cora traveled frequently for work, and whenever she was gone for an extended period, she'd ask Sarah to water her plants and collect her mail. Sarah had free access to the apartment, treating it like her own second home. I had always seen it as a sign of their close sisterly bond. But now, I realized Sarah had been exploiting her sister's absence, using the apartment as the perfect, unsuspected location for her affair. She was using her own sister's home to sleep with her sister's best friend's husband. The thought sent a chill down my spine. And one question kept nagging at me. Why Sarah? Of all the women in the world, why did my husband's affair have to be with my best friend's sister? Especially the Sarah who had doted on me since childhood. Looking back, I started to notice things. Sarah was always kind to me, but there was a strange, subtle thorn hidden in her kindness. On my wedding day, she came to the bridal suite, held my hands tightly, and said, "To see our Ilara become such a beautiful bride. You have no idea how long I've waited for this day. I've truly been waiting for today." At the time, I thought it was just a heartfelt congratulations. But now, her words, "I've truly been waiting for today," took on a completely different meaning. Had she been waiting for me to get married? For there to be something she could take from me? The way she was overly friendly with Evan whenever the three of us had dinner, every memory now seemed sinister. Most unnervingly, for the past few months, Sarah had been incessantly asking me about Evan. Once, sitting in a cafe, she asked so casually, "So, what's Evan into these days? Are you two still doing well?" I hear men start to wander around the 8-year mark. I, thinking she was just concerned for me, told her everything: Evan's hobbies, his recent interests. Looking back, I had handed her a roadmap to seduce my husband. The thought of what she was planning behind that sweet face made my skin crawl. This wasn't some spontaneous fling. Sarah had approached my husband with a clear, calculated purpose. So, what was her purpose? If it wasn't simply because she was attracted to him, why was she so determined to ruin my life? Lying next to my sleeping husband in the dark, I clenched my fists and whispered, "It's okay, Ilara. You will find out. You will find out why she hates you this much." That night, I resolved not only to gather evidence of their affair, but also to uncover Sarah's true motive. I would soon discover that the clues lay in a long-forgotten past, in an incident that had taken place between our two families when I was just 7 years old. To uncover Sarah's real reason for targeting me, I first needed to secure irrefutable proof of her affair with my husband. That night, as I lay awake, I understood with painful clarity that emotions alone would win me nothing. All I had was the image I saw on Cora's sofa, a memory, not a photograph or a video. If I had screamed and grabbed my husband then, what would have happened? It was obvious. He would have said, "Honey, it's a misunderstanding. I was just there to talk." Sarah would have shed tears, saying, "Alara, how could you think I would do such a thing to you? It's a misunderstanding," and tried to comfort me. They would have painted me as the overly sensitive, paranoid wife. I couldn't bear that. I was determined to leave them no room to escape. I would gather evidence so thorough and damning that they wouldn't be able to lift their heads in a court of law. The next morning, after sending my husband and daughter off, I went straight to the bank. For 8 years, I had managed our household finances. But a while back, Evan had insisted on having a separate credit card that he managed himself. I'd thought it was a small matter of a man's pride, but now I realized that card was the key. I requested the last 6 months of transaction records for our joint accounts. Sitting in a corner of a nearby cafe with the papers, my hands began to tremble again. There were countless suspicious charges. A hotel lounge in the Gold Coast I'd never heard of, a high-end restaurant in River North, and charges worth thousands of dollars from luxury boutiques on Michigan Avenue. I had never been to those places, nor had I ever received such expensive gifts from my husband. The numbers on the statements seemed to mock me. In 1 month alone, over $6,000 had been spent this way. I took pictures of every page and carefully placed the statements back in the drawer where he wouldn't notice. Afterward, I went into my daughter's room and stared at a photo of her on the bookshelf. Maya, just starting middle school, still adored her father. If he was late, she'd wait by the door. If he spilled something on his shirt, she'd rush to clean it. What kind of face would she make if she found out? The thought alone was heartbreaking. In that moment, I made another resolution. This fight must be quiet but decisive, so that my daughter won't be pointed at in school, so that her parents' story doesn't become town gossip. Instead of crying, I clenched my jaw and opened my laptop. I slowly typed 2 phrases into the search bar: infidelity divorce lawyer and dissipation of marital assets. After carefully reviewing the lists, I found a female lawyer in her late 40s with an impressive track record in contentious divorce cases. Her office was in the loop. I called that afternoon and scheduled the earliest possible consultation. A few days later, I was sitting in her office. The lawyer looked at me quietly from behind a thick stack of files. In a shaky voice, I told her everything. What I saw at Cora's house, the bank statements, and the fact that the other woman was my best friend's sister. I choked up several times, but I forced myself to continue. After listening intently, she put down her pen and looked me straight in the eye. "Alara, based on what you've told me, you have a strong case. The evidence of him spending marital funds on his affair partner will give you significant leverage in the divorce settlement. This is what we call dissipation of assets. But since we're doing this, let's do it right. I want you to gather ironclad evidence that will leave them no room for denial. Photos of them together in a private space, texts, call logs, financial records, the more, the better. And until you have it all, do not let your husband know you suspect anything. If you show your hand now, you're the only one who will get hurt." Her cool, professional advice was strangely comforting. I wasn't alone anymore. From that day forward, I lived like a hunter. I secretly placed a small recording device in my husband's car. While he was in the shower, I carefully picked up his phone, which he always left face down. As expected, it was locked, but I tried a few old passwords he used to use. On the 3rd try, the screen unlocked, and inside, I found things I could barely stand to look at. Hundreds of lurid text messages with a contact saved as Sarah. I even found a conversation from the day I caught them. Think Alara suspects anything? No. She's so naive, it's a blessing. Good. Just hang in there a bit longer. As soon as the asset division is sorted, I'm filing for divorce. I photographed every single message with my phone. My hands shook, but I didn't shed a tear. Crying was a luxury I couldn't afford. Instead, I thought to myself, So, you want to sort out the assets first? Go right ahead. But I'll be the one deciding whose hands those assets end up in. Over the next few weeks, I methodically built my case. Recordings of their phone calls, text messages, credit card statements, and even a formal request for the security camera footage from the entrance of Cora's apartment building. As the evidence file grew thicker, I felt a strange sense of calm. But the more evidence I collected, the more one question loomed larger. Their text messages weren't just physical, they often contained strange phrases. Sarah would text things like, "I finally feel a little bit of relief. It feels like I'm finally paying her back for what happened 30 years ago. You don't need to know. Just think of it as helping me. Paying her back for what happened 30 years ago." I stared at that line for a long time. It meant Sarah's real reason for seducing my husband was rooted in something that had happened long ago. 30 years ago, I would have been just 7 years old. What could a 7-year-old girl have possibly done to make her hate me so much? There was only one person in the world who might know the answer: my father. That evening, I called my father's number for the first time in a long while. His cheerful voice came through the phone, but I couldn't bring myself to smile. In the most nonchalant tone I could manage, my heart racing, I asked, "Dad, this is a random question. But can I ask you something? When I was little, around 7, did anything happen between our family and Cora's family?" A heavy silence followed on the other end. Then, my father's voice, now low and somber, returned. "Alara, that's not something to talk about over the phone. Come down to the house this weekend." I knew it instantly. Something had definitely happened that summer 30 years ago, and that something was tearing my life apart now. That weekend, I was on the road to my childhood home. It was in Havenwood, a small town in Wisconsin, about a 2-hour drive from Chicago. The neighborhood where I grew up, and where Cora's family had lived, was there. Our houses faced each other across a narrow street. As children, Cora and I had run back and forth across that street dozens of times a day. And somewhere in that small town lay the dormant event that had fueled Sarah's 30-year hatred for me. My hands kept slipping on the steering wheel. I told Evan I was going to help my parents with some canning. I left Maya in Chicago, citing a weekend study group, and drove alone. I didn't even turn on the radio. For 2 hours, only one question echoed in my mind. What on earth happened that summer 30 years ago? When I opened the gate to my parents' house, my father, who had been sitting on the porch, slowly stood up. He was 74 this year and looked thinner than when I had last seen him a few months ago. "Dad, I'm here." I tried to sound bright. "You're here. Did you eat?" He asked gruffly, as always, and led me into the main living room. My mother was out volunteering at her church. I suspected my father had planned it this way. This was a story that couldn't be told in front of her. From the depths of a wardrobe, my father pulled out an old, faded brown box. He placed it quietly on the table between us and smoked a cigarette in silence. As the smoke drifted out the window, I held my breath. After a long while, he finally spoke. "Alara, I don't know how you came to ask about this, but this is a story I've carried in my heart for 30 years. Since you asked today, I'll tell you everything." I placed my hands on my knees and waited. It was the summer you were 7, which meant Cora's sister, Sarah, was 13. Back then, I worked late at the factory and often came home in the early morning. That night, around 2 a.m., as I was walking down our street, I saw a strange man coming out of Cora's house. At first, I thought it was a burglar, and my heart stopped. But the person who came out to see him off was none other than Cora's mother, Sarah's mother. They held each other at the gate for a long time before the man disappeared down the street and she went back inside. I just stood there, frozen. I felt my breath catch. Sarah's mother. She was the woman who always wore an apron that smelled of sesame oil and welcomed me with a warm smile. She was the kindest mother to Cora and Sarah and always had a plate of pancakes for me. My father tapped his cigarette ash into an ashtray and continued. I couldn't sleep for days after that. Cora's father was my friend from elementary school. We saw each other on the street every morning. Should I tell him? Or should I pretend I saw nothing? I was torn. But over the next month, I saw her meet that man 2 more times. One day, I even saw him go into their house in broad daylight. "So you decided to tell him?" I whispered, my voice trembling. My father nodded slowly. "Yes." I finally called Cora's father up to our back porch, and I told him everything I had seen. You have no idea how hard it was, as a man, as a friend, to say those words. But he didn't say anything. He just smoked a whole cigarette, said a single thank you, and left. My father's voice wavered. I would never forget the look in his eyes at that moment. And 2 months after that, Cora's parents got a divorce. Sarah's mother left, and her father stayed in that house with his 2 daughters. The way Sarah cried, the whole town knew. A 13-year-old girl who starved herself for days, just waiting by the front door for her mother. Cora was too young to understand, but Sarah knew everything. She knew why her mother had to leave, and she knew where the story had come from. Finally, I understood the root of Sarah's hatred for me. To a 13-year-old Sarah, the beginning of this tragedy was my father's words. If my father hadn't said anything to her father on that porch, her mother would still be with them. That's what she must have believed. So that's why she hates me. The words escaped my lips. My father looked at me, surprised. Sarah hates you? What are you talking about, Alara? I couldn't bring myself to tell him everything right then. How could I describe the scene on Cora's sofa? I just mumbled, I think she's been upset with me about something lately. My father seemed to sense there was more, but he didn't press. Instead, he took a yellowed letter out of the old box and placed it in front of me. This is a letter Cora's father left for me long after that incident. It was his last letter to me before he passed away a few years ago. Since you asked about this today, I think you should be the one to read it. With trembling hands, I took the letter. My father stood up and quietly closed the door, leaving me alone to read it. I held it for a moment before carefully unfolding it. The first sentence read, My friend, for 30 years I couldn't bring myself to send this letter because I felt so sorry for you. You probably still believe that our family fell apart because of what you told me that day. But that wasn't it. The truth was already inside our home long before you ever spoke to me on that porch. I froze. So, the real reason for their divorce wasn't my father's words. The guilt he had carried for 30 years wasn't his to bear. And in that letter lay the true root of Sarah's 30-year hatred for me. My hands shaking, I turned to the next page. And as I read, I felt the blood turn to ice in my veins. The real reason Sarah hated me wasn't because of my father. It was because of a secret she herself had been hiding for 30 years. My hand trembled as I turned to the second page of the letter. The neat handwriting of Cora's late father filled the yellowed paper. I took a deep breath and began to read. Before you told me what you saw on the porch that day, I already knew. To be precise, I had suspected my wife's infidelity for 2 months. I just didn't have proof, and I was trying to hold it together for the sake of the children. I paused. So my father's words weren't the catalyst for the divorce. The heavy burden he had carried for 3 decades wasn't his fault at all. I clutched the letter and continued reading. The moment I became certain of her affair was because of our eldest daughter, Sarah. It was an afternoon that summer, when Sarah was 13. I had come home from work briefly to pick up some documents I'd forgotten. As I approached the house, I heard Sarah's voice coming from the master bedroom. She was arguing with someone. It was a man's voice I didn't recognize. My heart sank. A 13-year-old Sarah arguing with a strange man? I stood outside the door, holding my breath, and listened. The man was telling Sarah, "You can't tell anyone about the money I gave you. Not even your mother. This is our little secret. That means you also can't tell your dad that I come here to see your mom. Got it?" And Sarah replied, "Okay. But next time, you have to get me something better. Something nicer than the last bracelet." I almost dropped the letter. A 13-year-old Sarah had been accepting money and gifts from her mother's lover in exchange for keeping the affair a secret from her own father. It was more than just keeping a secret. Cora's father's letter continued. That evening, I returned home and acted as if nothing had happened. My wife, Sarah, Cora, none of them knew I had been there that afternoon. But later that night, I snuck into Sarah's room and went through her drawers. It was something a father should never do, but I wasn't in my right mind. And in that drawer, I found things a 13-year-old should never have. A gold bracelet, a necklace, and a wad of cash that amounted to several $100s a fortune back then. A chill ran through me. Hundreds of dollars in the early 90s was the equivalent of several thousand today. A child had been taking payoffs to turn a blind eye to her mother's infidelity. For 2 months after that, I was living in hell. More than my wife's betrayal, The fact that my young daughter was making such calculations was what broke me. Then, one day, you called me up to your porch and told me the story. In that moment, I knew it was time to make a decision. If it hadn't been for you, I don't know how much longer I would have endured that silent agony alone. I finally understood. The reason Cora's father hadn't said anything on the porch, why he had just smoked a cigarette and left, wasn't out of resentment. It was gratitude. It was the quietest way a man could thank his old friend for pulling the trigger he couldn't pull himself. The letter ended with this paragraph. After we decided to divorce, I never told Sarah that I knew about the things in her drawer. I just told her that Mommy and Daddy were separating and that it wasn't her fault. I thought that letting her live with her own guilt would be punishment enough. But now, I am nearing the end of my life. I'm leaving this letter with you for one reason. If the day ever comes when Sarah directs the arrow of her blame towards you or your family, I want you to show her this. The real reason our family broke apart wasn't you. It was her. It's time she knew that. I sat there for a long time after reading the last sentence. I felt no tears, just a cold numbness spreading through my body. For 30 years. For 30 years, Sarah had known that the true reason her Unimaginable was because of her own actions. Yet she had shifted that blame onto my father's words and lived with that lie. She had passed that resentment down to me, planning a 30-year revenge, all while smiling and holding my hand in the bridal suite on my wedding day. I finally saw Sarah's true face. She wasn't a victim. The 13-year-old girl who had traded her mother's affair for gifts was still the same person 30 years later, a woman driven by cold calculation. She needed to destroy my family to absolve her own guilt, to make me the one to fall so she could feel righteous. I carefully folded the letter and placed it back in the brown box. Then I walked out of the room. My father was still on the porch, smoking. He saw me and patted the seat next to him. I sat down and asked quietly, "Dad, can I borrow this letter for a little while? There's somewhere it needs to be." He looked at me for a long moment and then nodded. "Alara, I won't ask for details, but promise me one thing. Whatever you do with that letter, don't let our daughter get hurt." At his words, tears finally streamed down my face. I squeezed his weathered hand and nodded. "I won't, Dad. I won't get hurt. The only ones who will get hurt are the ones who hurt me." On the 2-hour drive back to Chicago, I kept glancing at the brown box on the passenger seat. Inside it, the 30-year-old guilt of a 13-year-old girl lay dormant on a yellowed piece of paper, and it was about to become my final weapon, the one that would bring Sarah down for good. That night, after Evan was asleep, I went into my home office. I took out the thick file of evidence I had been compiling and placed the letter on top of it. Bank statements, credit card bills, text message screenshots, call recordings, and now, a 30-year-old letter. I had everything I needed to destroy them both, but I wasn't going to play my cards just yet. I had no intention of quietly filing for divorce and letting it end there. I planned to obliterate them in the most spectacular way possible, in front of the people and things they held most dear. For that, I needed a stage. I flipped through the calendar on my desk and circled a date in red. It was the last Saturday of the next month. The day of Sarah's 44th birthday party, an extravagant event that Cora, unaware of everything, was throwing for her sister at a fancy restaurant she had booked out entirely. I whispered to the red circle on the calendar, "Sarah, that will be the last day you ever smile." There were exactly 3 weeks until Sarah's birthday party. For those 3 weeks, I lived 2 lives. In the morning, I was the devoted wife who ironed her husband's shirts and packed her daughter's lunch. After they left, I was the cold, calculating plaintiff meeting with my lawyer in the loop. It was an exhausting double life. But strangely, I didn't crumble. The image of them on that sofa was still too vivid. My final meeting with the lawyer took place 10 days before the party. I had organized all the evidence into 3 separate manila folders. The first held the credit card and bank statements. The second contained the text messages and car recordings. The third held a copy of the old letter. The lawyer reviewed everything, then put down her pen and looked at me. "Alara, I'll be frank. With this, you'll get the maximum possible settlement in a divorce. Your husband is clearly the at-fault party, so the division of assets will be heavily in your favor. That $6,000 in dissipated assets? We can argue for that entire amount, and more, to be credited to your side of the ledger. How much are we talking about?" My voice was surprisingly steady. The marital assets, including the equity in your house, will likely be split with you receiving a significantly larger share. Given the evidence of financial infidelity, we can argue for a settlement of around $300,000 in your favor, including the house. I didn't smile at the number. I already knew that no amount of money could erase the scars. I asked just one more thing. The divorce papers. Once I sign, the other party is notified immediately, right? Yes. The moment we file, a process server is dispatched to deliver the documents to the other party's address. It usually takes a few days. I took out my planner and marked a star on the date exactly 3 days before the party. That was the day I would file the papers. It meant that the summons would arrive at my husband's and Sarah's homes the day before her birthday. They would have to sit at that glamorous party with the legal documents fresh in their hands. The thought brought the first faint smile to my lips in weeks. But as I left the lawyer's office, one thought weighed heavily on me. Maya. On the train ride home, I kept picturing her face. A 7th grader, who still tried to sit on her father's lap. How would she go to school? How would she eat, after all of this exploded? That night, I lingered outside her bedroom door, debating whether to tell her everything or to shield her until it was over. I couldn't decide. Finally, I knocked. She was at her desk, doing homework with headphones on. I sat on the edge of her bed, just watching her for a while. When she finally took off her headphones and turned to me, I spoke in the calmest voice I could muster. Maya, sweetie, Dad and we're not doing so well right now. We might have to talk about living separately soon. But no matter what happens, Mom will always be right here for you. I didn't say more. She didn't need to know what her father had done, or with whom. But my daughter looked at me for a moment and then asked quietly, Mom, is it because of Aunt Sarah? I felt my heart freeze. I forced a neutral expression. Maya, why would you ask about Aunt Sarah? She hesitated, then said in a low voice, I saw her at the mall last weekend, Mom. She was holding hands with a man. And that man was Dad. I tried to tell myself I was wrong, that it was just someone who looked like him. But you haven't been sleeping well, so I kind of knew. In that instant, I pulled her into a fierce hug. The fact that my 14-year-old daughter had been carrying this burden alone for weeks. That night, for the first time, I wept. With her face buried in my shoulder, she whispered, Mom, I'm on your side. Whatever you do, I'm on your side. I held her until well past midnight. And in that moment, my final resolve hardened. I could not lose this fight. Not for me, but for the child in my arms who was promising to protect me. And then, the day arrived. The morning of Sarah's birthday party. I woke up 30 minutes earlier than usual. It was still dark outside. Beside me, Evan slept peacefully, oblivious. The thick legal envelope that had been delivered the previous afternoon was probably sitting in the trunk of his car, unopened. He had turned pale when the process server handed it to him, and he had been watching me all evening. I had ignored his glances and served dinner as usual. I also knew that an identical envelope had arrived at Sarah's house. Cora had called me late last night, worried. Alara, Sarah's been locked in her room all day. Did something happen? I hadn't told Cora anything yet. The stage for that revelation would be the restaurant tonight. I slipped out of bed and took out a black dress from the back of my closet. It was a simple, knee-length sheath dress I usually wore to funerals. That was the outfit I would wear tonight. To Sarah's 44th birthday party, I was going as a mourner. As I zipped up the dress in front of the mirror, I heard a sound behind me. It was Evan, awake. Honey, it's Sarah's birthday today. I'm supposed to go with you, right? His voice was a half-tone lower than usual, heavy with anxiety. I met his eyes in the mirror and gave a faint smile. Of course, you have to be there. It's a day where she'll really need you by her side. His face tightened, but he forced a smile back. I turned away from his reflection. Breakfast was silent. I had already asked my parents to have Maya sleep over. She didn't ask any questions, just gave me a tight hug before she left. I stood at the door until she was out of sight. That afternoon I finished my makeup, putting on a string of pearls with the black dress. In my clutch were 2 USB drives and a copy of the old letter. One drive held the text messages and call recordings. The other held the CCTV footage from Cora's apartment building. The restaurant was a high-end Italian place in River North. a private, intimate space that Cora had booked exclusively for the 20 or so guests. Evan and I arrived at 6 p.m. sharp. I paused at the heavy wooden door of the restaurant. Evan put his hand on the handle and looked back at me. "Alara, are you coming in?" My heart was pounding. Everything I had prepared for the last 3 weeks would begin the moment this door opened. I tightened my grip on my clutch and smiled sweetly at my husband. "Yes, honey. Let's go in. I'm going to give your Sarah a night she'll never forget." His face stiffened as he pushed the door open. The sound of soft classical music and the scent of candles drifted out. And there, at the head of the main table, sat the guest of honor, Sarah. Her face was pale, likely from the legal papers she'd received, but she was forcing a smile. The moment our eyes met, I saw that smile falter for a fraction of a second. I didn't miss it. Towards that faltering smile, I began to walk, very, very slowly. The restaurant was aglow with candlelight, the air filled with soft classical music. At the large round table in the back sat Cora's relatives, Sarah's close friends, and Cora herself. At the head of the table, Sarah, the guest of honor, sat resplendent in a red satin dress, though the dark circles under her eyes betrayed her anxiety. When Evan and I entered, Cora stood up with a bright smile. "Alara, you made it." Sarah wasn't feeling her best today, but I'm sure seeing you will cheer her up. "Evan, welcome." Seeing Cora's innocent, beaming face, my resolve wavered for a second. She had no idea what this party was about to become, or how her own home had been used. But I quickly steeled myself. Cora needed to know the truth, too. If not today, she would spend the rest of her life living under her sister's shadow, eventually losing me as well. As I took my seat, I met Sarah's eyes for the first time. She forced a smile and greeted me. "Alara, you came. Thank you for coming to my birthday." "Happy birthday, Sarah," I replied. "This is going to be a very special day for you." Her smile faltered again. She quickly raised her glass, trying to change the subject. "Well, everyone's here, so let's get started. A toast, first to my wonderful sister Cora for putting this all together." Wine glasses clinked. The courses came and went, and people offered their birthday wishes to Sarah. I smiled and clinked glasses, but the 2 USB drives and the letter in my clutch felt heavy on my lap. Just as the main course was cleared and the waiter stepped away to prepare the cake, Cora stood up and raised her glass. "Okay, everyone. Let's go around and say a few words for the birthday girl. Anything you want to share with my sister?" I seized the moment. I slowly stood up. All eyes turned to me. Beside me, Evan shifted uncomfortably and tugged at my sleeve. "Alara, sit down. What are you doing?" I gently shook his hand off and raised my glass. Looking directly at Sarah, I spoke in a clear, steady voice. "Sarah, tonight, I want to return the favor for the 30 years of love you've shown me. Looking back, I'm finally able to appreciate everything you've given me. So tonight, I'd like to give it all back to you." A hush fell over the table. Cora, sensing something was wrong, looked at me with concern. Sarah tried to maintain her smile, but the hand holding her wine glass was trembling. "Alara, what are you talking about? Sit down, let's talk." Her voice had a faint crack in it. I didn't sit. Instead, I pulled the first document from my clutch. It was my husband's credit card statement, with thousands of dollars in charges highlighted in red. This is a record of my husband's spending for the past 6 months. Restaurants in River North, hotel lounges in the Gold Coast, luxury boutiques on Michigan Avenue. I've never been to any of these places with him. So I wonder, who enjoyed these $6,000 worth of dinners and gifts with him? I placed the statement on the table. The soft thud of the paper on the white tablecloth echoed louder than the music. Evan tried to jump up. "Alara, what is this? What do you think you're doing?" "Sit down," I said in a low, cold voice. He was so stunned by my tone that he sank back into his chair. I turned my gaze back to Sarah. She was no longer smiling. "Second, I'd like to show you this." I took out the first USB drive and connected it to a tablet I had brought. A text message conversation filled the screen. The lurid messages between my husband and the contact named Sarah were there for everyone to see. Cora gasped, covering her mouth. "Think Alara suspects anything?" "No. She's so naive, it's a blessing." "Good. Just hang in there a bit longer." As soon as the asset division is sorted, I'm filing for divorce. With each swipe to a new message, the faces around the table grew paler. Sarah put her glass down and tried to sound composed. Ilara, that's a misunderstanding. I just thought of Evan as a brother. A brother, Sarah? I cut her off quietly. I connected the second USB drive. This time, it was the CCTV footage from Cora's apartment building. Scene after scene showed Evan entering the building with practiced ease, and Sarah using the keypad to enter during the days Cora was away, all time-stamped. This is the security footage from Cora's building over the last 2 months. It shows how many times you entered the apartment while she was away, and how many times my husband went in to meet you. Cora, I'm so sorry. Your sister has been using your home as a meeting spot with her brother. At that, Cora shot up from her seat, her face as white as a sheet. Sarah, what is this? Ilara, is this all true? Her voice trembled. Sarah reached for her sister, pleading. Cora, calm down. She's misunderstanding something. A misunderstanding? I cut her off again, and I took out the final piece. A photograph. Just before closing the door that day, I had taken out my phone and silently snapped a few pictures of the scene on the sofa. A photo that clearly showed their entangled silhouettes. I laid the photos on the table, one by one. 2 months ago, this is what I saw in Cora's apartment, and on that day, this is what they said about me. Just a little longer. Once I'm done with her, we can live however we want. The restaurant was frozen in silence. Everyone's eyes were fixed on Evan and Sarah. Evan's face was beet red. He buried his face in his hands, unable to say a word. Sarah glared at me, her teeth clenched. The forced smile was gone, replaced by a look of pure venom. So, you saw, Ilara? What are you going to do about it? Her voice was low, but laced with 30 years of malice. I looked her in the eye and met her gaze. What am I going to do? As of yesterday, you both have been served. I'm suing you, Sarah, for dissipation of marital assets and emotional distress. And I'm filing for divorce from my husband. The financial claim against you is for the maximum allowable damages. As for my husband, after the asset division, he'll be walking out of our house with nothing but the clothes on his back. And Sarah, the contents of these USBs are being sent to your company's HR department in an anonymous email at midnight tonight. And to your husband. What? Sarah's eyes widened in panic. She was married too. 5 years ago, she had remarried a wealthy businessman. And her entire lavish lifestyle depended on him. The one thing she couldn't afford to lose while planning her 30-year revenge was her new husband. I knew this. Everything you tried to take from me, I'm going to take from you, one by one. And tonight is just the beginning. Sarah's face turned ashen. She tried to stand, but her legs gave out, and she collapsed back into her chair. Evan was already sobbing into his hands. Cora was shaking her sister's arm, crying. Sarah, is this true? Why did you do this to me? Why to Ilara? In the midst of the chaos, Sarah snarled at me. Do you really think it ends here? For the first time, I let out a small, cold laugh. I reached into my clutch and my fingers brushed against the last, unplayed card. The yellowed copy of the letter. No, Sarah, this is just the overture. The real story begins now. The story of the guilt you've projected onto my father for 30 years, and whose sin it really was. I think we need to talk about that to make this a truly unforgettable birthday party. I saw the last bit of color drain from Sarah's face. The moment Sarah's face went white, I calmly pulled the last piece of paper from my clutch. It was the copy of the old, yellowed letter. The 30 years of its existence seemed to be embedded in the very paper, in Cora's father's neat script. I held it up carefully with both hands. The restaurant was as silent as a tomb. Even the soft classical music had stopped at some point. The waiters stood frozen by the door, watching our table. I looked directly at Sarah. Sarah, I know now why you've hated me for 30 years. You believed your mother left when you were 13 because of something my father said. So you nurtured that resentment for 3 decades and tried to pay it back by destroying my life. This man, this situation? It was all for that, wasn't it? Sarah didn't answer. She just glared at me, her jaw tight. Cora grabbed her sister's arm. Sarah, what is she talking about? What happened 30 years ago between our dad and Ilara's father? As if answering Cora's question, I held up the letter. Cora, This is a letter your father left for my father before he passed away. A letter that hasn't seen the light of day for 30 years. Tonight, I'm going to read it. The real reason your sister did this to me is right here." Sarah's eyes darted to the letter, wide with panic. She tried to lunge for it. "Alara, give that to me. That's not yours. It's a fake." "You can be the judge of whether it's fake or not," I said, pulling the letter out of her reach. In a calm voice, I began to read aloud. "Before you told me what you saw on the porch that day, I already knew. The moment I became certain of her affair was because of our eldest daughter, Sarah." As I read that line, Sarah buried her face in her hands. Cora turned to her. "Sarah, what does he mean?" "It was because of you?" I continued to read. It was an afternoon that summer, when Sarah was 13. I had come home from work briefly. As I approached the house, I heard Sarah's voice coming from the master bedroom. She was arguing with a man I didn't recognize. The man was telling Sarah, "You can't tell anyone about the money I gave you, not even your mother. This is our little secret. That means you also can't tell your dad that I come here to see your mom. Got it?" Someone at the table gasped. I looked at Sarah. Her shoulders were shaking violently behind her hands. And Sarah replied, "Okay. But next time, you have to get me something better. Something nicer than the last bracelet." "Stop it!" Sarah shrieked, jumping to her feet. Her voice was raw, but I didn't put the letter down. That night, I snuck into Sarah's room and went through her drawers. It was something a father should never do, but I wasn't in my right mind. And in that drawer, I found things a 13-year-old should never have. A gold bracelet, a necklace, and a wad of cash that amounted to several $100s. Cora turned on her sister, her eyes brimming with tears. "Sarah, is this true? When you were 13, you took money from that man to hide it from Dad? Is that why Mom left?" "Cora, no, it wasn't like that," Sarah pleaded, reaching for her, but Cora recoiled. "Then is this letter a lie? Is Dad's letter a lie?" "Cora, listen to me, I was just a kid. I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know." I cut through her excuses and continued reading the letter. After we decided to divorce, I never told Sarah that I knew about the things in her drawer. I just told her that Mommy and Daddy were separating and that it wasn't her fault. I thought that letting her live with her own guilt would be punishment enough. At that, Sarah collapsed, sinking into her chair as if her bones had dissolved. She gripped the edge of the table, her body racked with sobs. Cora stood over her, her voice low and trembling. "Sarah, so you knew all along. Dad knew all along. And you let Alara's father take the blame? You let everyone believe he was the reason Mom left? And for 30 years you plotted revenge against Alara for it? By sleeping with her husband?" Sarah couldn't answer. She just looked up at me with pleading eyes. "Alara, that was so long ago. I was a child. What does a child know? I was just scared of him, and he kept giving me things." "What does a child know, Sarah?" I asked quietly. "Well, you're 44 now. You should know better. You should know what a monstrous thing it is to seduce your best friend's husband to destroy her life. Let's say you were ignorant at 13. What's your excuse at 44? I'm curious, Sarah. How did the lie you started 30 years ago bring you to this table tonight?" Sarah couldn't speak. She just lowered her head and began to weep. Through her sobs, a few words escaped. I'm sorry, Alara. Cora, I'm sorry." No one at the table said a word. The birthday party had turned into a public trial, exposing a 30-year-old sin. Just then, the wooden door of the restaurant opened. I turned to look. A man in his early 50s stood there, dressed in a well-tailored suit. He was holding a thick manila envelope. It was Sarah's wealthy second husband. He stood at the door for a moment, taking in the scene. I knew instantly that the envelope in his hand was the one that had been delivered to their home. He walked slowly toward Sarah, his voice low and firm. "Sarah, this arrived at the house this afternoon. Divorce papers. After coming here and hearing all of this, I can no longer believe your claims that it was all a misunderstanding." Sarah looked up at him, her face a mask of desperation. "Darling, no. It's not what you think. She's..." "Sarah," the man cut her off. He dropped the envelope onto the table. "What did I tell you when we got married? I can forgive anything but lies and betrayal. Tonight, I've seen the kind of person you've been for the last 30 years. You were that person even at 13. I just didn't know it. My lawyer will be in touch tomorrow." Without another word, he turned and walked out. As the heavy door clicked shut, Sarah completely broke down. The lawsuit, her job, and now, the wealthy husband she had clung to everything she had built over the last 30 years was collapsing around her in the space of a single evening. Beside me, Evan turned to me, his face pale with shock. "Alara, I swear, I didn't know. I didn't know she approached me for a reason like that. I really didn't know. I turned my head slowly to face him. And for the first time, I smiled a cold, chilling smile. "You didn't know? Well, honey, after this is over, let's go home and you can make a list of everything you knew and everything you didn't. We still have our own story to finish, don't we?" His face went completely white. In the car on the way home, Evan was silent. I was driving. He sat in the passenger seat, a shell of a man, staring out the window. The 40-minute drive from River North to our suburban home must have felt longer than 30 years to him. I didn't turn on the radio. When we arrived and I opened the front door, he collapsed right there in the entryway. He finally looked up at me and spoke. "Alara, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please just give me one more chance. If I had known why she was coming on to me, I swear I never would have." I leaned against the wall, looking down at him. I asked in a quiet voice, "So, if she had approached you for no reason, it would have been okay? If she wasn't a person with a grudge against me, the affair would have been fine?" He couldn't answer. I walked past him into the living room and placed a prepared file on the coffee table. It contained the divorce agreement, the asset division proposal, and the custody papers for our daughter. "Evan, sign these. Tonight. We're done." "Alara, just give me some time. I made a terrible mistake. Please, for my sake. For Maya's sake." "For Maya's sake?" I cut him off. And for the first time, I told him that our daughter already knew. "Evan, Maya saw you. At the mall a few weeks ago. She saw you and Sarah holding hands. Our 14-year-old daughter has been carrying that with her to school every day for weeks. Do you really think you have the right to mention her name right now?" He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. But I felt nothing for his tears. I had burned away 30 years of affection the moment I saw him on that sofa. I sat down across from him and pushed the papers toward him. "An amicable divorce is the best option for you. If you sign this now, I'll make sure this story doesn't spread at your office. But the asset division is non-negotiable, as calculated by my lawyer. The house goes to me. You walk out with your personal belongings. I'll accept the settlement in installments over 6 months, and I get full physical and legal custody of Maya. You will pay $1,500 a month in child support until she's an adult." He stared at the numbers on the page for a long time. Then, with a defeated sigh, he picked up the pen. His hand trembled as he signed, but I didn't offer any comfort. As he signed the last page, I watched our 8-year marriage end on a few sheets of paper. That night, my husband left with one suitcase and a few boxes of clothes. Before he closed the door, he turned back, as if to say something. But I had already turned my back on him. I locked the door behind him and sat down on the sofa. It was the home we had shared for 8 years, but with him gone, it felt more spacious, more peaceful. 2 months later, the legal proceedings were finalized. The court ordered Sarah to pay the full amount I had requested, citing the premeditated nature of the affair and the long history of malice. After the divorce and asset division were complete, my net settlement came to just over $340,000. On top of that, I would receive the additional settlement from my husband and monthly child support. I used the money to pay off the mortgage completely and set aside the rest as a new start for myself and my daughter. I heard bits and pieces about Sarah through Cora. As promised, Sarah's second husband filed for divorce the very next day. A wealthy man, he had a meticulous prenuptial agreement. The beautiful house in the city, the credit cards, the VIP status at department stores, it was all in his name. After the divorce, all Sarah was left with were the clothes she brought into the marriage and a small personal bank account. She lost her job, too. The anonymous email had reached the company executives. She was quietly forced to resign from her position as a marketing director for violating the company's code of conduct. The one affair she had pursued to settle a 30-year grudge cost her her marriage, her career, and her social standing. But the most painful loss for her was her relationship with Cora. Cora never took another call from her sister after that night. When Sarah, desperate after the divorce and losing her job, reached out for help, Cora sent her a single text message, which she later showed me. Sarah, if you ever want me to call you my sister again, you first need to open that drawer you hid from Dad when you were 13. Until then, don't contact me. The day she showed me that text, I held Cora for a long time. She had lost a sister, just as I had. She cried silently on my shoulder, for what felt like an eternity. When her tears dried, she said, "Alara, I'm sorry. I'm apologizing for my sister. And I want you to know, I'm still here. I'm always going to be by your side. Let's not let one person destroy our 30 years." At her words, tears streamed down my face. I had lost Sarah, but I hadn't lost Cora. That fact was the greatest comfort to me. I didn't seek out news of my husband. I only heard by chance that he had been up for a promotion at his company, but the rumors of his divorce and the scandal had caused him to be passed over. His colleagues treated him differently. I felt neither satisfaction nor sadness at the news. He had simply fallen into the pit he had dug for himself. One evening, long after everything had settled, I went to visit my father. He was on the porch, smoking, as always. I sat next to him and told him everything. Calmly. When I finished, including the story of the letter, he stared at the sky for a long time. Then he said in a low voice, "Alara, the guilt I carried alone for 30 years. I feel like it's finally gone. But I'm sorry that my daughter had to carry that burden for me." I took his weathered hand in mine. "Dad, that burden was never yours, and it was never mine. It belonged to her from the very beginning. I just returned it to its rightful owner. You don't have to carry anything anymore." For the first time, my father cried in front of me. His 4-year-old shoulders shook silently. I put my arm around him. The 30-year misunderstanding finally came to an end in my father's backyard that night. Driving home, I glanced at the photo of Maya on my dashboard. I now knew with absolute clarity who I needed to protect. And I realized that the real reason I had won this fight wasn't the money from the settlement. It was because of the 14-year-old girl who, in the middle of that hell, had whispered, "Mom, I'm on your side." A new season was truly beginning for us. 1 year has passed since that night at the party. The seasons have come full circle, and it is autumn again. The restaurant in River North, where I stood in my black dress, is now just a distant memory, like an old photograph. The most surprising thing is how calm my heart is now. The heart that once pounded so furiously. Maya and I have moved. The old house held too many ghosts of my husband. After talking it over with her, we moved to a cozy apartment in a different neighborhood, one with a view of a small park. On moving day, Maya sat on a cardboard box, looked up at me, and said, "Mom, I like it so much better here. It smells like our home." At her words, I laughed. A real, joyful laugh that wasn't tinged with tears, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. With the settlement money, I started studying again. I'm working towards a certification in psychological counseling, a path I abandoned when I got married. The desire to listen to the stories of other women who have faced similar pain grew within me during that ordeal. Going back to school at 37 isn't easy, but every morning, after packing Maya's lunch, I sit at a cafe and study for 3 hours. The biggest change is in Maya's face. The child who had worn an adult's weary expression for months has returned to being a 15-year-old. She recently joined the broadcast club at school and makes me read scripts with her every night. As I watch her laugh, I feel a quiet sense of gratitude. Her laughter is the reward for everything I endured. Maya rarely speaks of her father. Once a month, she meets him for coffee at a nearby cafe. I heard he was quietly transferred to a branch office in another state. When she comes back from seeing him, I don't ask questions. I just make her favorite dinner. Sometimes, over that dinner, she'll say, "Mom, Dad said to tell you he's really sorry." I just smile and put another piece of chicken on her plate. "I know, sweetie. You just focus on eating." I have no feelings left for the man who sends his apologies through our child. Not hate, not resentment, and certainly not love. My friendship with Cora has only deepened. She completely cut ties with her sister after that night. We heard through relatives that Sarah moved to a small town somewhere in the Midwest and is living quietly. Cora is always composed when she relays this news. She once said, "Alara, I don't hate her. I just don't want to see her again, and that's enough." I nodded. The fact that she hadn't completely erased her sister was a comfort to me. It was Cora's way of dealing with it, a final remnant of a 30-year sisterhood. Cora comes over often. She's become a wonderful aunt to Maya and my closest friend. We recently took a short trip to Lake Michigan, just the three of us. Sitting in a cafe overlooking the water, she said, "You know, Alara, I think we're the real sisters now." I smiled. We had both lost a sister to find each other. My father is much brighter now, too. Free from the guilt he carried for so long, he laughs more freely. I take Maya to visit him every couple of months. He loves telling his granddaughter old stories. The only story we never speak of is the one from that summer 30 years ago. We burned it away with the cigarette smoke in his backyard. Small changes have accumulated in my life. Waking up to an empty space beside me no longer hurts. Not having to smell another woman's perfume on my husband's shirts. And most importantly, going to bed at night without having to wear two different faces. Upon these small changes, I have slowly, carefully rebuilt myself. Sometimes I wonder, what if I hadn't held back that day at Cora's apartment? What if I had stormed in? They would have denied everything, and I would have been painted as the hysterical wife. The 30-year-old truth would have remained locked in that brown box, and my father would have passed away carrying that guilt. And Maya and I would have eventually been swallowed by their lies. The one step I took that day, the step not to scream but to walk quietly down the stairs, is what ultimately saved my family. I know this with every fiber of my being. Perhaps someone listening to this story is in a similar place. Smelling an unfamiliar scent on a partner's shirt. Feeling a creeping unease as a longtime friend becomes strangely overfamiliar. Sensing that something is fundamentally wrong in a relationship you hold dear. If I could offer one piece of advice, it would be this. Don't scream. Don't cause a scene. Instead, quietly prepare. Because the greatest punishment for the person who tried to break you is to see you smile again. And that smile will be as bright and lasting as the quiet preparation you put into it. Today, like every other day, I packed my daughter's lunch and sat down at the cafe with my books. Outside, the yellow autumn leaves danced in the wind. I took a sip of my coffee and whispered to myself, "You've done well, Alara, and you're going to keep doing well."